Hello, everyone. I'm so thrilled and honored to introduce Dr. Eben Alexander in the context of 1000 Reasons for Feeling Awe. Even just hearing about his life story and reading his three books is a good reason to be filled with awe. Dr. Alexander is a renowned neurosurgeon and researcher with over 25 years of experience. He has authored and co-authored more than 150 papers in peer-reviewed journals and made over 230 presentations worldwide. His life took an unexpected turn in 2008 when he fell into a week-long coma caused by a rare and mysterious bacterial brain infection. Upon awakening, he recalled a profound odyssey into another realm, steering him to investigate near-death experiences and their implications for consciousness and reality. Inspired by this vision, Dr. Alexander authored the best-selling book, Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife, and two follow-up fascinating books exploring the intersection of science, religion, and the human understanding of the afterlife. His experiences have led him to promote a more complete reconciliation of modern science and spirituality. Today, Dr. Alexander dedicates his time to educating others about near-death and spiritually transformative experiences and their implications for understanding consciousness and reality. So, after this somewhat broad introduction, I'm so happy to have you here.
Well, Shai, thank you so much for having me on today. It's great to be able to talk with you this beautiful morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So, as you know, this program is titled 1000 Reasons for Feeling Awe. And I've already mentioned that I think that your life work is permeated with awe. There's nothing I think you could speak about that is not imbued with this sense. However, I would love to hear from you what your specific awe for, if a specific reason for feeling awe that you have chosen for our discussion today.
Well, I think it's important to point out what you say in so many ways is true from your position and from mine, that my life has been filled with awe ever since my beautiful journey back in 2008 when I went to coma due to a severe gram-negative bacterial meningoencephalitis that afflicted all lobes of my brain. That's why the scientific community is so taken with my case, is because there's a medical case report that basically validates my points that I made in Proof of Heaven. And it even goes further. The case report is in the Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, September 2018. And those physicians who wrote that case report were not involved in my care, but fascinated by my recovery. And the things they point out in that case report is, one, they confirmed that I should have had no experience whatsoever. And that's why everything I describe in that in the book, Proof of Heaven, that beautiful spiritual journey, completely violates what modern neuroscience says is necessary for the modern brain and an understanding of consciousness. In other words, it shows us the brain is not the creator of consciousness. And this is really the gift. Now, and the way I experienced it, of course, as I talked about my journey through the Gateway Valley and the core realm, these extraordinary spiritual realms that were much more real than this realm. It's with an absolute feeling of awe and majesty. And that has to do with the extreme kind of spectrum of available information in that realm. It has to do with the fact that in that realm, we are completely outside of time. We're in a more eternal realm. That's why so many near-death experiencers describe a life review where they relive birth, death, everything in between, even past lives and visions of future lives. It just shows us that the universe is far grander than our simple little materialist model that we're just these physical beings burnt to death and nothing more. But it shows us a grander aspect of existence. And that's the part of us that expands when the physical brain and body die. It's the exact opposite of what I, as a materialist neuroscientist before my coma, would have expected. And yet, the most beautiful thing as you listen to these descriptions is you find that this is our spiritual home, that people feel very comfortable in that environment, that there's nothing to fear about that dying process, because as we ascend in these beautiful spiritual realms, we find that this is exactly where we belong. And in many ways, we see that this material world is very important for soul growth, but ultimately, it's not our ultimate home in all of this. And that beautiful spiritual connection that we get there, bathing in that ocean of love, that's what near-death experiencers have been describing, going back thousands of years across all cultures. And I think important to point out that 90% plus of these near-death experiences going back thousands of years across all belief systems and continents. And that includes many who were previously atheist or agnostic. 90% of those who have this kind of experience come away believing that there is a loving personal force, a benevolent force, a God force at the core of the universe. And what I came back realizing is it doesn't matter if you want to label that force as God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, Great Spirit, that ultimately that force of love, mercy, compassion, acceptance, and understanding goes far beyond our simplistic material being concepts. And this is where we truly start to come into that realm of awe and that binding force of love, and find out how healing, that kind of wholeness of love, as we bring love into our heart, share that with the universe, manifesting unconditional love. That's really the best and purest form of love expressed through the NDE as it's been presented to us. And that comes packaged with a tremendous sense of awe and of humility and of feeling the love of that universe for us, and a shared sense of meaning and purpose. This is where I think not only the book Proof of Heaven, but especially the books Map of Heaven, and then the most recent one, Living in a Mindful Universe, that was co-written with my life partner, Karen Newell, take us so much further towards uniting science and spirituality, because ultimately they move forward together. People have thought for a long time that science and spirituality are at odds with each other, whereas in fact, some of the deepest lessons of the quantum-informed science of consciousness tells us that this thing that we call spirit or soul is absolutely necessary to fully explain the bigger aspects of human experience. And that always comes packaged with this beautiful sense of awe and majesty. And as I said, humility, never forgetting gratitude, because every breath is a tremendous gift. And I came to realize that not only was my meningitis a beautiful gift, but a lot of the trials and challenges in my life leading up to that, the fact I was adopted, at age 11 days, I was left behind by my birth mother and adopted at age 4 months. Or my struggles with alcohol. I quit drinking early in my career. I never had any trouble with it at work, but I leaned too heavily on that scotch on my nights off call. And I realized that was just no way to be. But I'm grateful for the challenges, for the adoption, for the struggles with alcohol, and then having to leave that behind back in 1991. And it's all about gratitude. Ultimately, that is what fuels, that is what takes that kind of sense of emotional awe and majesty in meditating and in going through these experiences, and bringing it back to this world in a helpful fashion.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. So prior to the interview, you told me, never ever have I lost sight of the awe inspired by this near-death experience. Could you bring us closer to this experience? What was the source of awe that you found in this experience?
Well, I would say it's important to kind of take you back to the details of the experience.
Yes.
And one of the most crucial things to understand is that I was amnesic. I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life, of humanity, this universe. I really had an empty slate. And that was a mystery to me initially in trying to analyze all this. But in the months and year or so after my coma, it became clear why that amnesia was so crucial. It's because if it followed a more normal script, for example, if I had scripted this and my father had been there, my adoptive father who passed over 4 years before my coma, in spite of the fact of this 1 in 10 million diagnosis of E. coli meningitis in an adult, in spite of the 1 in a billion recovery, which is the other main point that the case review authors made, is how do you explain this complete recovery over 2 months? I mean, it's really unprecedented in the medical literature. And in fact, when the authors of the paper were challenged by the peer review editors of the journal, how do you explain this case? They said it's because he had a near-death experience. And that, I think, is a very important lesson, that modern medicine is getting to a point where they acknowledge not only placebo effect and also other spiritual factors that can lead to spontaneous remissions of advanced cancers and infections, but especially these cases of complete recovery in the setting of illnesses that really defy our expectations as medical scientists. And that is really the gift. And that is the awe and the majesty of it. So remember now that I go into this with amnesia. And I started in that earthworm eye view, a very primitive course on responsive realm, but I was rescued by this slowly spinning white light that had fine silvery and golden tendrils. It came packaged with a perfect musical melody. And it led me up out of that dark earthworm eye view into the brilliant ultra-real Gateway Valley. And this is where one is completely elevated out of our notion of Earth time. This is where one can go through life review and relive all the events of their life as a form of learning and teaching the lessons, and realizing that in that life review, it's very common that you experience it from the perspective of others that were influenced by your thoughts and actions in the events that are then shown to you again in your life review as a form of course correction or learning. The important thing to remember is in this realm, it has so much power that it is truly a reliving of events, not just a remembering, and from the perspective of others. This should give you an idea of just how powerful that one mind concept is and the higher primordial mind that we are assuming in those journeys. But as I've said, the most amazing thing about it, and this is something that the vast majority of near-death experiencers will attest to, is the fact that it feels like our spiritual home. Although the words I use to describe it may sound kind of foreign and difficult to interpret, for many people, those words reminded them of their own journeys. And that's why that book, Map of Heaven, is made up of stories that were sent to me by people who read Proof of Heaven and would often say, well, I've never told anybody this before, but, and then they'd share their own story with me. It could have happened, 10 years, 40 years earlier. And they remember it as if it happened just yesterday. And it's they describe it with such joy in their voice, this kind of look of love in their eyes. And it's from a common experience, whether it be a near-death experience or shared death, which are just like near-death, but happen in perfectly healthy people, usually a relative of someone who's passing over. Then you have after-death communications and a whole host of other examples of non-local consciousness. That's the material of our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, where we assemble all that scientific data to make this case. But ultimately, what we're describing and what I describe in Proof of Heaven is that beautiful sense of love and of a shared purpose and meaning that we sense when we're connected with this one mind in this beautiful kind of grand way that really shows us our role in helping all of consciousness evolve, because essentially as sentient beings we're all contributing to this evolution of consciousness, and it's always towards that position of love, kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, which are the general principles operating in that beautiful loving God force at the core of our very conscious awareness, as I discovered in further levels of the journey. Because I went not just to that Gateway Valley that had many Earth-like features, and then swooping orbs of angelic choirs that were emanating chants and anthems and hymns that would profoundly energize this sense of awe within me. that sense of love and connection. And that really is right at the heart of why near-death experiencers come back to this world after bathing in that ocean of love and awe. And they know there's nothing to fear about the dying process. It's simply the end of the physical body. It's not the end of our relationships with loved ones. That is shown very clearly, not only in near-death experiences and shared death, but also in hospice work. For example, the work of Christopher Kerr in his book, Death is But a Dream. He makes a beautiful case of how when you look at hospice situations in terminal care, you find the very same set of events of people reuniting with souls of departed loved ones, going through elements of life review, making amends, but also sensing that beautiful kind of connection of awe and majesty and beauty that would lead so many to say they'd rather just stay there. But that's why it's so important to point out near-death experiencers usually come back for a reason. It's usually to help others, to help this world, to take care of loved ones, what have you. But they come back for a certain reason. But that's not to deny the majesty and awe that they've experienced that reassure them that there's nothing to fear about death and that our existence as spiritual beings in many ways is far grander than what we often experience just as material beings when we have very limited beliefs and perceptions in this world, as opposed to spending that time going within, centering prayer, meditation, the various ways that we can really awaken to that mental layer of the universe in broad fashion and do so before we actually are in the process of dying and leaving the physical body.
Well, just listening to you opens the heart widely, and especially I think I'm touched by these words that we this realization that we have a spiritual home. Could you speak a little about this realization as you it was tapped into in that experience, and also compared to our notion of earthly home? Because usually when we think of home, of course we ascribe this sense of home to certain earthly forms of existence, such as family units, physical houses, and so on.
Right. Well, remember that in those life reviews, and there was an excellent summary of the scientifically investigated aspects of life reviews in an article by Dr. Bruce Grayson in the Journal of Near-Death Studies back in the fall of 2021. And that article is a very good review of life reviews and shows you these amazing factors that they're really like a reliving of events. And from the perspective of others. So it's a much grander kind of sense of existence than just, oh, I have these personal memories of events in my life. But the thing that's so beautiful about it is all of those things that you call home, in our earthly sense, are available in that kind of life review setting. So you realize that that's a much richer home, that spiritual home, where you actually have access to all aspects of your life and even to parts of previous lifetimes, and often a sense of projection into future lifetimes. So that's why I make the point that you might have homes that feel like a wonderful home here in the physical realm, but ultimately, all of them come together through the availability of your entire life when you're in that particular spiritual realm. Very important to understand. It's a whole different ordering of time. And in fact, in the scientific discussions of this kind of feature, you often have to refer, for example, to the work of Bernard Carr. He's a British physicist. He had worked with Stephen Hawking, who was actually his doctoral advisor. And Bernard Carr has come up with higher dimensional models involving higher dimensions of space and time to help us come to a deeper understanding of how all this can work. But ultimately, it's very important to pay attention to the scientific study of these levels of consciousness and basically what it's showing us about the primacy of mind, because ultimately, the picture that emerges is really that we're sharing the one mind. This is something we discuss in Living in a Mindful Universe in great detail. And of course, that's been endorsed by many scientists around the world who are thought leaders in the modern consciousness movement. But what you find is we can also, in meditation, we can come to know that sense of love and connection with the universe. And I would say that all the benefits that I've gained through my near-death experience and through what it showed me, I've now proven to myself in many of our workshops that Karen Newell and I have done, that other people can achieve the same kinds of beautiful, lofty kind of connection to a higher sense of self and soul and spirit through meditation, through going within. And especially if you have a powerful tool, if you already have one, more power to you. For those people who still have trouble with that annoying voice in their head, the voice of the annoying roommate, as Michael Singer puts it in his book, The Untethered Soul. And you need to quiet that little voice in your head. Sacred acoustics, differential frequency brainwave entrainment is a very powerful way to do that. I use sacred acoustics an hour or two a day for meditation. I've been doing that for more than a decade now. And it has everything to do with being able to conjure up those beautiful aspects of the realms that I visited. And to develop ongoing relationships with the various guides and angels that I encounter there, like my beautiful guardian angel, who, of course, 4 months after my coma, when I received that picture in the mail from my birth family, that's what proved the reality of the journey to me. But also, as I describe in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe, connecting with my adoptive father, with his soul. He had passed over 4 years before my coma. 2.5 years post-coma, I actually connected with him in deep meditation. And that's how I use the meditation now, although I must confess that I have not yet duplicated through meditation the full-blown sense of ultra reality that was such a cornerstone of the experience when I had my near-death experience. And it could be that I just have to wait until the next time that my brain and body are that close to actual death to really kind of break free into that sense of ultra reality that was so stunning to me during the actual journey. But it's really sharing stories. And this is why people who are aware of the NDE literature, as Ken Ring, one of the founders of the International Association of Near-Death Studies, back in the mid-1970s, as Ken Ring has written decades ago, just hearing about these stories is enough to awaken people tremendously, to give them the same benefits in their life that the near-death experiencer got from living through the experience. So it helps people to become familiar with these. And if you want a resource for thousands of raw, experiences, go to IANDS.org, the International Association of Near-Death Studies, or go to NDERF.org. That's Jeffrey and Jody Long's beautiful site. He's a radiation oncologist, and they have assembled a tremendous number of NDEs on NDERF.org. And once people start to learn more and more about these experiences, certainly reading the books, Proof of Heaven, many people have found very helpful. But of course, I would say the real proof of heaven is in the third book, Living in a Mindful Universe. That's where we really bring the science and spirituality together.
I see. That's wonderful. So you're saying that in meditation, we can all share these kind of essential insight, essential experience, but not necessarily with the same intensity that characterizes near-death experiences. Because in these experiences, we experience being transported to an altogether a different dimension.
Well, that can happen in meditation in our workshops. I mean, people have come into very kind of surprisingly detailed realms beyond the physical realm, even with early exposure to sacred acoustics in one of our workshops, but not always. And it's not the right thing for every person. Some people need other modalities, but the ultimate goal is to take that little voice in our head, the little voice of rational thought and logic and all of that, and put that into timeout, because that's also the voice of our ego. And that's where it often can lead us astray. And this is where I've learned, beginning with the touchstone of my near-death experience, but expanding it through a very active program of meditation using sacred acoustics over the last decade or so, That's what where I've found, and especially with the workshops that Karen and I have given, I've seen experiences of people who had never had an NDE, and yet they were able to start having very profound spiritual experiences that ended up serving as epiphanies. Sometimes it happens very early on in their use of something like sacred acoustics. Sometimes we might hear about it years later, after years of practice. In fact, we had one good friend that we met in Costa Rica at a workshop we gave about 7 years ago, and he got nothing out of it back then. But then recently he contacted us and said he'd had an amazing result with one of the more recent sacred acoustics titles. So it's just if people keep going and keep giving it effort, you start finding there's more and more to discover. The important thing is acknowledging that in this one mind model of the universe, you realize that going within mind, for example, in centering prayer or meditation, is not going deep down into the 3.5-pound gelatinous mass sitting in a warm, dark bath inside your skull, but it's actually going out into the mind of the universe, because the mind is not created by the brain. The brain is serving as a filter to allow primordial consciousness to present as this little eddy current that we all tend to think is our own. And yet there's plenty of evidence in the world of parapsychology that things like telepathy are very real. Remote viewing is very real. Distance healing is very real. These have all been scientifically demonstrated. And they show us this broader field of consciousness to which we all have access. And that's where meditations and centering prayer can gain so much power, when you realize that going deep into mind, especially when you can leave your little ego voice that's trying to explain it all and complain and use fear and anxiety, which is what the ego uses, but to open up to a grander sense of higher soul. That's what meditation can allow. And that's where I think people can really start to gain tremendous benefits and start discovering for themselves the feeling of this awe and majesty and sense of shared meaning and purpose with the universe at large.
Yeah, can you talk a little about the awe of the one mind? What do we mean by this experience of being connected to the one mind?
Well, it's really just becoming the essence of that engine of reality that generates all of ontologic reality in this emerging world, and realizing that that includes multiple streams of past history in your soul group and in your soul line, as well as future possibilities. And so one thing that became clear to me in my journey was, especially as I ascended through the Gateway Valley that had a lot of earth-like features, but angelic choirs and spiritual features, but all of that collapsed down. And I remember seeing all of four-dimensional space-time collapsing down. That's its material world with its temporal ordering that's very different from deep time or meta time. That's the temporal ordering in that spiritual realm that allows one to witness your entire life, birth to death, everything in between, things before and after, as simultaneous events. So obviously you're in a much grander scheme of kind of causality and temporal flow. And what I then witnessed was all of that deep time and that spiritual realm collapsing down as I entered what I call the core. The core was infinite inky blackness. It was filled to overflowing with that divine love of that God force. In fact, I remember referring often to that dazzling darkness. It was a complete resolution of all dualities and paradoxes in that core realm, which is where I realized that our very conscious awareness is directly sourced in that God force, that mind at the core of the universe, and realizing that we're never separate from that. But in that core vision, this incredible unification is what I witnessed, felt, and bathed in. I mean, that oneness with the universe and the mind of the universe, an extraordinary gift. So it's often called by meditators that experience of no self, completely escaping the kind of ego sense. And that's where you're realizing that all these interconnections, all these various souls in the soul group are contributing to the growth, to the transformation, to the evolution of consciousness itself. But it's that grander view that gives us that sense, and also greatly adds to our sense of meaning and purpose shared with that of the universe. Once you have that far grander view, which for me was crystal clear in that core realm, but then I would tumble back down to the earthworm eye view and then learn that by remembering the musical notes of the melody, I could navigate these various realms. Music became kind of the engine of my traversal of spiritual realms. And that is something I think any and all of us can use, because vibration and frequency are such universal kind of tools of resonance, of information overlap, which is how we find our loved ones and find our souls and soul groups in this vast universe of spiritual experience. This is, again, why it is our natural spiritual home, because we don't have to put effort into finding those loved ones. They are there automatically. This resonance, this kind of overlap of familiarity, like attracts like, as Plotinus put it. It's something that becomes very apparent in that spiritual realm. And our will also becomes very apparent, because the more we bring the will of love and of kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance for ourselves and for fellow beings, the more we find that this pathway in its broader lessons of instruction concerning our relationships and actions with others around us and all the events of our life can contribute more greatly towards the most efficient soul group, as we come to recognize that ultimately our most efficient pathway forward is by always showing these messages of unconditional love, kindness, compassion, mercy, acceptance, forgiveness, and of course, never forgetting gratitude.
So you're saying that music brings us home?
In many ways, music is our way. And of course, do know, it should be obvious, but I'll state it anyway, that in those realms, the music we hear is far beyond the kind of music you might construct to put to ears in our four-dimensional space-time, which has a very limited physics to support the music. In those realms, in the ideal realms of the spiritual, that music is unlimited. And in fact, I'm convinced that is the source of where Beethoven and Chopin, Rachmaninoff, all these great composers, and certainly the Beatles, Dionne Warwick and others who note that love is all we need. I would say that these spiritual realms is where that ideal music comes from. And that people have learned to use various techniques to get into that hypnagogic space, the same space we take them with sacred acoustics meditations. But creative minds throughout history, like Einstein, would drift around in a sailboat looking up at the sky. And that's where he came up with some of his best ideas for physics. Likewise, Robert Louis Stevenson, the renowned Scottish poet, musician, novelist, he had a technique where when he was dozing off, he'd use some weights, they'd wake him up, and after a few micro naps, boom, he had the solution to his creative problem for his music or poetry or what have you. Likewise, Salvador Dali had similar techniques. Thomas Alva Edison, the greatest inventor in GE history, General Electric history, he had a technique where he'd let batteries wake him up as he was dozing off. And that hypnagogic nap was where he got his brilliant ideas. So we're just suggesting you can use sacred acoustics meditation to get in the same kind of deep spiritual space for creativity and accessing the ideal. But often on these journeys, when we come back to this world, we can remember a lot of those transitions as involving music, as involving frequency and vibration. And that it becomes a tremendous tool that's very useful to us in navigating those realms.
That's really, really fascinating. Now, I do have one last question, although I think I could listen to you for hours. One last question in the limited context of our discussion. What would you tell people who feel that they're, because I've met many people in this lifetime, probably as a part of my work in the spiritual domain, people who feel that as long as they are in this world, that they are in a sort of exile, which means that they feel that they are away from home, and that they are somehow longing to return.
Well, what
So,
I would say,
yes.
what I would say is this is where we get the work done. This realm is where we get the work done when we're temporarily dumbed down and don't have the full knowledge of our higher soul. But this is where we have skin in the game. And it's by recovering that sense of love and compassion, kindness, mercy, and acceptance for self and for others, relating that to the mind of the universe. The more we can do that in our thoughts and actions down here, the more easily and efficient our soul growth in those higher realms. Now, the time between lives is spent going through life review, reuniting with souls of departed loved ones, and then after that life review, any course corrections we can make, fine, but then planning the next incarnations, because anyone and everyone must understand that in the scientific demonstration of the nature of consciousness in the modern era, a huge part of the supporting data is from evidence of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. Now, this is not a question of whether or not you want to believe in reincarnation. Reincarnation is an established fact from a scientific perspective. Go to uvadops.org, University of Virginia Division of Perceptual Studies, and start reviewing their cases. They have more than 2,700 cases of past life memories in children suggestive of reincarnation. They've studied over the last 6 decades, of which 1,700 cases are solved. That is, they found the person who existed before. When you review that literature, you'll realize reincarnation is real. And for those who need to put it together in a much bigger package, go to bigelowinstitute.org. There are 28 essays there available for free to the reading public at bigelowinstitute.org. And these essays all support the reality of the afterlife and in many cases of reincarnation from a scientific perspective. So it's really just about kind of this bigger picture of understanding our growth and existence. Now, do know that the doctors who have examined those children will tell you you must get these memories before age 5 or 6, because they're natural processes that cover them over, so that most of us, by the time we're teenagers and adults, we don't have ready access to memories of past lives, but we had them as children. Just in our culture, any discussion of that kind of thing is so suppressed. And yet, hopefully in the modern era, especially with the scientific evidence supporting the reality of reincarnation, people will start to discuss those stories more widely. And when their children speak of past lives, take note, pay attention. Don't lead them on, but simply let them offer you the information. But be very careful to record it as best you can. And the sooner you can involve an expert like Jim Tucker, Carol Bowman, Jim Matlock, these are people who have global renown in studying past life memories in children. But this is where we start to then make sense of a bigger aspect of our existence that involves multiple lifetimes, but always, as I said, involves this acknowledgement of the one mind and of manifesting that love, compassion, kindness, and acceptance and forgiveness, and bringing that into every one of our actions with self and with others.
Well, this has been absolutely inspiring. I'm so thankful that we have had this opportunity to explore this unfathomable source of awe.
Shai, thank you so much for having me on. And yes, people can learn more at ebenalexander.com or at sacredacoustics.com. And also I can recommend Inner Sanctum Center, INNER Sanctum Center.com. That has a lot of resources from both Karen and myself, interviews that we did during the pandemic, and lots of other information. There's a whole mental health course there for professionals, but InnerSanctumCenter.com is a great way to kind of keep up with what we're doing beyond EbenAlexander.com and SacredAcoustics.com. Thanks for having me on.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.